on average, it took about 3 to 7 days or longer to process persons. And it is important for us to note what this processing includes. It consists of taking photographs, interviewing detainees, fingerprinting them, taking measurements of them, taking description of them. And the information gathered is stored in the JCF criminal database. No copy of that information gathered is given to the detainee, and there appears not to be any limitation on how long the data will be retained. Now, Regulation 30 under the Emergency Powers Regulation 2018 does empower an authorized person to take photographs, fingerprint measurement, descriptions, etc. of any person detained. And it also permits the JCF to retain that information. Our concern, clearly, is that the regulation provides no safeguards as to how the information gathered on the detainee is to be kept. The appropriate security clearance to gain access to the information, in what circumstances should that information be called into use, nor is there any oversight mechanism for that data that had been gathered. Our concern, and we have received complaints to the effect that police officers and soldiers sometimes take photographs of detainees on their mobile telephones. This has implications for the fairness of an identification parade, for example. According to the police, the processing of detainees without identification took longer than those with. We have an abundance of evidence and complaints to the contrary. The other thing, and I want to, since Chairman has given me 10 minutes, I just want to go through some of the paragraphs quickly. We have also picked up that being without a photographic identification on your person is being treated by some members of the security forces as an offense in and of itself. So if you're walking on the road and you don't have a photographic ID, it is being treated almost as a basis for detention. So, as at October the 9th, there were 26 detainees locked up at Freeport who cumulatively spent 7.4 years since January 2018 in custody. And even after this inordinate length of time, there is yet to be a determination of their fate. It has been reported to our office repeatedly that detainees have lost jobs, they have lost opportunities, and actually there is no shortage of evidence in our office on that matter. We move, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, to October 31.
No. That 24 where you mentioned about those 26 persons who were locked up, by your data, any of those were charged?
No. No, they had not been charged.
So on average, they've each been detained for over 100 days?
No, not on average. The analysis of the data for October 31 shows that the average length of...
No, I'm talking of the 26.
Of the 26.
Because
no, they were just there.
Because you're saying 26 detainees have spent 2,708. So if you just do a straight division of the 2,708 by the 26, on average, some might be more than 100, but on average, those 26 would have been detained for over 100 days, well over 3 months.
Yes.
Without being charged.
Yes,
at all, and these were not persons who were previously had warrants outstanding or anything like that.
And this data is specific to that group of just to the 26.
Just to the 26.
It's limited to the 26.
All right. On the same 26, just for clarity, did these 26 detainees have any form of identification, to your knowledge?
No, I'm not able to answer that because I'm not sure. But I think that the length of time, based on how we understand the system to work, would not relate to the lack of having an identification. It may be relating to other things.
Mr. Chairman, I realize that we are questioning the presentation as it goes. Questioning. No, please. You can lead you can lead Mrs. Harrison Henry. You're not going to lead me, please. Let me go back to you.
No, with all due respect, that is insulting to the guests of the Parliament.
That's what you have allowed the members to be doing, Mr. Chairman.
The remark you made about
Mr.
you
Chairman,
can't lead the lady is very disrespectful.
And I got up and looked at her name, and I called her by name.
But to imply that she can be led is very disrespectful. And I'll crave your indulgence for us not to go down that road.
Mr. Chairman,
we must treat our guests.
You have reduced the meeting to what it is because you have allowed the other members them to carry on like that. And I've been sitting here waiting on her to make her presentation. And every time, Member Bunting and Member Daly leads the lady down the road.
Again, why you insist on being disrespectful to the guests of the Parliament? I'll implore you to keep that outside the House.
I think he was downstairs drinking.
I hope, Chairman,
I want you to understand that I'm not a drinker. I don't drink. But Mr. Chairman, to Mrs. Harrison Henry, how many children are there in the lockups in St. James?
As we speak now?
As we speak.
I can't give you that figure because that figure is, that figure is dynamic. It is a moving figure. As we sit here talking, children could come in.
Madam, you have been given statistics up to October 19, and you did mention that there are children locked up at Barrytown. I'm asking you the question, what are your numbers?
I didn't say, what I said, member, is that children are kept at Barrytown. That's what I said.
At Barrytown lockup station?
So if you go
for God's sake, Member Daly, allow the lady.
Can you just go to page 14, member?
Madam,
can you go to page 14 and you will see how many children?
Madam,
yes,
I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question.
No, it's not 14. It's not page 14.
Am I allowed to ask a question? What is wrong with you, drunkards?
Can I?
Are you started? Are you started?
Yes.
You withdraw yours. You withdraw yours.
The member is from St. James. I don't know if it's
Central St. James.
I don't. Yes,
right.
Because I'm very deeply concerned over the statement made by the public defender about children being locked up.
Yeah.
Are children being hosted at Barrytown lockup?
Member,
yes,
when I first went down to St. James, it was because we had received information that there were children at Barrytown.
I'm asking you.
At that time, there were approximately 7 children.
Up to October 9th, 19?
No, that would have been late January. So I think,
Madam,
for clarity, Chair, may I just explain something? The statistical data provided to this honorable committee does not represent the situation as it stands today. It is an exposition of what has occurred since January the 18th over time. So I can't tell you as I sit here how many children are at Barrytown. I know when I went there at the end of January, I saw 7.
Madam, What happens here is that quite often,
Yes.
when things are said in Parliament, whether it be parliamentary sitting or committees, it hits the airwaves and it makes headlines. I just want to make sure that the statement that you're making, the presentation that you're making, it goes with dates so that
It goes with what?
Dates. So now you're saying to me it spreads over time.
From the 18th of January, right up to the.
But the table shows the
16.
figures.
Yeah, the table is there.
Table on page 14.
Are
which
there
the public
any
defender pointed you to.
reason of
You
significance?
never bring your reading glasses.
Are there any, you notice I'm not paying attention to you? Are there any reasons, madam, that
Yes.
they were locked, they were host at this? Was it that they didn't have parents? Was it that they did something wrong? What are the reasons why they were kept?
Absolutely not. They were collected very much like the vast majority of citizens in Montego Bay who have been collected by the police.
And the parents did not go to
They
retrieve the
were
kids?
released.
Okay.
They were all released. In fact, let me not go further, because whatever we represent here, our member, is grounded in the statistics and the data provided to us by the Jamaica Constabulary Force. We get it every night relating to the previous day, and we have been getting that from January the 18th. So what we have done is analyzed the data from the 18th of January straight up now to November the 16th, and we look in a detailed way on what was available to us October the 9th and October the 31st.
So for clarity, what you're saying to the committee today is that since January up to October, you have had 7 children that were taken into custody and were housed at the Bartown police station.
That is correct.
Seven.
That is correct.
Thanks.
That is correct.
That's what I want to find out.
Just, Chairman, just to follow up.
What are the ages? You want to yield to him?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hold on.
Do you have the information?
Sorry, I'm not hearing you, sir.
Speak directly into the mic, Frank.
Do you have the information on the ages of those children?
I'm thankful for this opportunity, member. Since the conversation and the questions have kind of fast-forwarded the debate, let us go to page 14, because I want to make a clarification. Look at page 14. Table. Look at the table. I had said children that was on 7 under 15. The age 15 to 17 is still a child in our law, and we had 98 of those. And those were kept.
So a total
primarily,
of 105
member.
children. Yeah. So a total of 105 children.
Yes.
Up to October 9th.
October 31st.
Up to October 31st. Were detained.
Member, that is that which we could determine from the records given to us.
So at least 105 children were detained in St. James under the state of emergency.
From January 18th to October 31. So we have done an analysis over
that period.
The time.
That is clear and very useful. Thank you.
Does that number make representative to that one infamous youngster, 15-year-old from Flankers too?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure? Okay,
what you're speaking about?
The same one that did the shooting in close proximity to the airport.
Actually, that took place prior to the declaration of the state of emergency. Indeed, and in fact, it may have been one of the reasons for the proclamation of the state of emergency. And so far as we are concerned, those would have been allegations made against him. So
Against
I wouldn't
who?
be able to comment on that.
Against who?
The same 15-year-old that you are telling me about.
No, he was arrested by the police.
But that would be on allegations.
No.
But that would be a case.
Chairman.
Chairman.
You know, Mr. Chairman,
Until he is
Mr. Clark is
convicted.
deliberately trying to draw a red herring across trail.
No,
Would we allow the
Chairman.
public
Red herring.
defender?
What red herring? That's a simple question.
That if the person was arrested
Member.
and charged for
And
murder,
I
that
asked
is a
if
matter
that
before the
one
court.
person was a
and
part
not
of the
for something.
105
And you well
person.
know it was not, because these are detained.
Members all,
That's
please.
all I asked. I don't
Member
know why
Brown.
you think it's a red herring.
Member Brown. Mr. Clark.
So I'm not member anymore.
Mr. Brown is not of your disposition at all. I must say that.
I merely asked a question. I want clarity.
No, let me, Member Green, could you please go ahead?
Yeah, I guess I want to ask a series of short questions. But I would say, Chair, I would prefer the approach that we set a time limit, that we ask the public defender to keep within the time limit, and then we question after. You know, because I believe if we don't take that approach, we'll be here for a very, very long time. Right? So, but the problem, you can't take that approach once you start allowing, and that's where it went. No, even for clarification, what I would suggest, what I have been doing, Chair, there are some things that I want clarified, but I've written them down to come back to them. But since we are on this road, I'll just ask 3 short questions. Clearly, I'm sure the public defender. No.
Mr. Chairman, before the member came, the committee agreed on how we would proceed, and he is trying to unilaterally change that. Would you?
Chair, I am not trying to change. I'm making a suggestion. If the chair doesn't think it's good for the better running of the committee, the chair hasn't taken a number of my suggestions, and I will not comment on how they've turned out. But I am going, but I would suggest that this is not the route. But nonetheless, I'm sure the public defender is aware that in our country we've had a number of criminal matters in which, unfortunately, the perpetrators of the crime allegations are against children. I guess that's my opening, and the public defender, I'm sure, can confirm that. One, my question would be if we have any information, if any of those children who were detained were so charged. That is one. 2, my understanding is that Barrett Town is a station that has been so designated for children when children are held, not just under a state of emergency, in general. The public defender would probably want to confirm that so that the committee would have that information. Additionally, does the public defender know if in those cases the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, or formerly CDA, would have been called in? Clearly from where I sit, I know that in the vast majority of cases that was the case. So again, just to go over it, I'm sure this you have them, public defender.
I think I have all of them. We first of all want to confirm that Barrett Town is the designated location for the keeping of children in the western part of Jamaica. And indeed, and in fact, Minister, when we made our visit there were other children from the corporate area sharing space. And indeed, and in fact, the facility, though recently refurbished, was still having problems. We're aware that children and young people engage in criminal activities. I think the age, the youthfulness tend to be consistent right around the world, and I don't think it's unique to Jamaica. No child has been charged so far as we know of those who have been detained. Right?
Yes, I would ask public defender just to double check why I say that, because one matter did come to me in my other capacity in terms of the Child Care and Protection Agency regarding a child that was detained. That my understanding is that the child was charged. And I think it was the same child that the member referenced.
But he would not have been...
He was detained under the state of emergency.
Pardon?
He was detained under the state of emergency.
He may have been detained under the SOE, but not relating to any criminal activity under the SOPE. So in other words, what it is alleged that he did was before the state of emergency. So he would have been apprehended under the state of emergency arising out of an incident outside of.
For public defender, my understanding is that part of the reasoning of the state of emergency is for you to be able to apprehend those who probably before then you were not able to apprehend, whether because you never had the space to, as the security forces, to operate in the communities. One of the things that the security forces said when they came here is that one of the reasons for the state of emergency was to clearly give them a more freedom to operate. So in other words, what we have seen is a sharp decline in crime under the state. So I wouldn't expect a number of the people who are apprehended would be apprehended for crimes committed during the state. In other words, part of the reasoning is that it was the circumstances prior to the state that gave rise to the state. So one would expect that those who are apprehended, no, because I don't see what I'm saying, I do not see why the public defender is making a distinction, because I don't think it makes a difference whether the crime was committed under the state or whether the crime was committed before.
That's your distinction, not the public defenders.
I'm just chair.
Could we defer the discussion on the information until after? I took your intervention in keeping with my earlier decision just to make any clarification on any parts of the presentation being made. But we can discuss the information provided after.
But Chairman, so that we don't lose the point, I take no issue with it, member. I was only pointing out that I was only distinguishing the case. I take no issue with that. Can we look at the table, please, members, on page 14, which I think is important. And this table groups persons by age at the time of detention. Now, we've had some problems with the quality of the data. Some of the dates of birth provided were clearly wrong, including some persons having been born in 2018. As such, in addition to missing date of birth, some others were excluded in the data cleaning process. Below there are 807 of 4,060 records, or nearly 20%, for which there is no date of birth. In the second table, the mean, median, mode, and range for the data is provided. The age is measured in completed years, age at the last birthday. So I believe, members, that the data here is fairly self-explanatory. The average period of detention was approximately 4.5 days. The precise period, however, is 4.4 days, with 1,244 persons detained for 2 days. There was one instance where the period of detention was 225 days. The data showed that 18 persons were detained for over 90 days.
In that one case that you highlighted, that person was charged?
No, he was still detained.
So they were held for 225 days without being charged?
That is correct.
Okay.
The data showed that 18 persons were detained over 90 days. Of this 18, 3 persons were each detained for over 200 days. These 18 persons up to then have spent cumulatively a total of 2,545 days, roughly 7 years in custody. Now, the table below, which really comes over on page 16, summarizes the information on time spent in detention. There are 929 missing cases. This is due to the fact that either the date of the detention or the date of release was missing, or in some cases both. In addition, there were invalid dates, and in at least 20 cases, the date of release was before the date of the detention. Such cases had to be discarded. The mean, median, mode, and range for the duration of detention is presented in the table below. The total number of days for which persons were in detention is provided as a sum. You will see that down at the bottom. Assuming that persons for whom data is missing spent on average the same amount of time in detention, this would represent an additional 4,097 days for a cumulative total of 17,907 days. This is approximately 50 years. This is 50 years of imprisonment. And for us, it represents 50 years of lost employment and lost opportunity.
But public defender, you know, when you
Mr.
no.
Member.
All right, through you, chair.
No, member. We all can have the discussion.
No, but chair, you see, I tell you, I believe in precedent setting. If you stop to clarify, then I must be allowed to also do so.
Oh, you're seeking a clarification now?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
My clarification is, why does the public defender seek to group the things and put them into years? You can just state the time. I do not see the reasoning, the motive. It is a clarification. Let me ask. I'm trying to clarify the useful.
No, okay. Let's have her answer.
The useful purpose of doing the cumulative, and what is the clarify the statistical basis of so doing.
I'll have that done.
I tell you, Chairman, for clarity and with the greatest respect, the cumulative years means a great deal, not only to this Commission of Parliament, but also to the persons who have lost those years. And I think, member, this is the way that this Commission of Parliament sees as the best way to make the point of the hardships that have been caused on a certain sector of Jamaicans in St. James. And I think, with respect, with the greatest respect to this committee, I think how we present the data really much depends on the discretion that we have in terms of how we present the data as we find it. This data, let me just remind everybody, is that which is given to us by the Jamaica Constabulary Force.
Okay. Member David.
Let me just indicate that I have absolutely no difficulty in the way the public defender chooses to make her point or make the point of her office to the people of Jamaica. So I have no issue with it at all. I have a clarification. If you were allowing the clarification, I wrote a Y somewhere. Please, let me just find it, because
Can I move to page 20? I want to look at multiple detentions. So we go straight to page 20. We found in the data that there were numerous instances of multiple detention. That is, the same person being detained subsequent to his release from an earlier detention, referred herein as multiple detention. A study of the data contained in the JCF release booklet disclosed 3,740 records for persons detained. Of these, there are notations for 10, which suggests that the detainee identified came back into custody. It should be noted that more than 150 names appear multiple times in the data. Given such a large number of persons were detained, it could be expected that there would be persons with the same name. So I've made a point about multiple detention. I want to go straight to paragraph 14. Based on the above, we have concluded, paragraph 41. Based on the above, we have concluded that 110 persons have been detained more than once. Given that there are over 150 names repeated in the spreadsheet, it may be that the number of persons taken in more than once is more than 110. At least one person appears, At least one person appears to have been detained 4 times. Another 8 have been detained 3 times. So what we have seen is that there are some deficiency in the data, and it can be seen, and the members here will recall that we have, where there is missing data, people's rights and capacity to go to court and establish their case is reduced. If you look at the table on page 22, you will see examples of the deficiency in data. Number of missing data, address 253, date of birth 259, date in custody, and so on. Reasons for detention. On the data provided by the JCF, there was no reason in the case of persons who were never charged assigned for detention. The detainee's custody card simply stated SOE or SOPE as the reason for the detention. Further, the JCF data is void, empty, non-existent of any record of an investigating officer or apprehending officer in cases of detention, as is required by Regulation 30 of the Emergency Powers Regulation, January 18, 2018. The data shows beyond challenge that the majority of persons detained, processed, and then released without being charged were not detained in accordance with the provisions of Regulation 30, but still apprehended and kept in custody purportedly by the use of the said regulation. I think the pie chart on the following page makes the point. Yes, I want to make a point to the members that where data is missing, especially data relating to the date a detainee comes into custody or the date a detainee is released from custody. If that record is not reliable and secured, it means that a detainee who may bring a claim for false imprisonment would be at a disadvantage in court, because when the information is sought from the police, they would have no data or something else may come forward. And we have seen this example time and time again, where the lack of proper record keeping affect fundamental rights of citizens. If we look, just the other day, we completed the Commission of Inquiry in relation to events of 2010, and the commissioners commented adversely on the lack of data relating to give an example, the identities of persons, police officers who were in the armored vehicle, the lack of information and record keeping of where bodies were picked up, where they were sighted and picked up. This is just to give an example. Moving right along, Mr. Chairman, we've gone to the pie chart. I believe, Chair, that the pie chart speaks for itself. I just want to re-emphasize that a person of interest is not an offense. SOE or SOPE is not an offense. VP, violence producer, is not an offense. A warrant is not an offense. We have a reasonable suspicion of murder. It certainly is a cause for someone coming into custody, but it cannot be classified as an offense. We have, Chairman, the establishment of the Emergency Powers Review Tribunal, and we just want to make some remarks, and we have made these points repeatedly, that the bases of detention are not intelligence-driven. And based on our investigations and what we see in Montego Bay, they are mainly arbitrary, random, without legal basis, aimed and targeted at particular groups of youth in certain communities. And we say it is largely discriminatory. Conditions of the lockups at Freeport, and members have to forgive me, some time has to be spent on that. The Freeport police station lockup is a hub of the activity in SOP in Western Jamaica. St. James, sorry. We have spoken repeatedly about the harsh conditions that detainees have had to endure. They are not persons who are ordinarily wanted by the police. As you can see, the statistics show that the vast majority of them are taken up, their lives disrupted, processed and released, and they are taken in, whether into the cage or into a cell, not even cardboard or newspaper provided for them to sleep. And we say, up to now, as we speak, and we say that there is overcrowding, the conditions are appallingly deplorable and shameful. We must remember that the standard that the Charter holds us to is one where persons are to be treated humanely, with respect and regard for the inherent dignity of the human person. And we, from the Office of the Public Defender, say that these standards have not been maintained. I want to go, before going further, I want to rely on Section 14, subsection 5 of the Charter. Any person deprived of his liberty shall be treated humanely and with respect for the inherent dignity of the person. And that is a standard that the Charter holds Parliament to, and it holds executive authority too, and it holds public authorities too. And that is also by way of Charter Provisions 13.4. This chapter applies to all law and binds the legislature, the executive, and all public authorities. The conditions, I don't know. We want to go to chapter 63. It's not only the public defender and the office of the public defender that have been saying this. We have gotten support from the Ministry of Health, the Public Health Department in St. James, upon whose reports, based on their investigations, and we have relied upon them. They have referred to overcrowding, absence of hand-washing machine facilities, inadequate ventilation and lighting, meals are late. They've received reports of skin rashes, like scabies and other things like that. Paragraph 65, by January 31, the Ministry of Health team returned to Freeport and on that occasion diagnosed and reported on the condition of the detainees. 10 had fungal rashes, 1 had scabies, 4 with respiratory illnesses, 3 with head injuries, 3 had gastrointestinal problems, and 1 with a urinary tract infection. The visit on April 17, 2018 reported overcrowding, non-functioning toilet, absence of hand washing facilities, shower walls, excess dampness, accumulated water on the ground in the shower area, inadequate ventilation, heavily soiled exhaust vents, resulting in inadequate removal of odors, particles, and other organic compounds from the indoor air quality that may cause respiratory condition. Not surprisingly, by April 24th, there was a massive gastrointestinal illness broke out at the Freeport police station lockup, where 105 detainees and others had to be treated. The health team expressed the view, which we accept, that the absence of proper hand-washing strategies among cell occupiers resulted in possible fecal-oral transmission of disease. Food and diet. It is a notorious fact that the government of Jamaica provides $300 a day per detainee for the provision of 3 meals per day. $300. Chairman, for each meal or 3? For 3 meals. 100 per meal. It has been the case for it has been the case for a long time. But the fact, I need to address this point, Chair. The fact that it has been the case for a long time doesn't make it right. But what is more, Chair, when somebody who has been picked up from his community and deprived of his liberty, locked up, he ought not to be asked to endure additional hardship. The other point I make, Chair, is that the 300, which is applicable to persons who are charged in the regular criminal justice system and persons who are in prisons, we submit for this committee's consideration that a detainee is not a person a part of the regular criminal justice system. He's not charged, he's not convicted, he's not awaiting trial, he's not somebody taken with a date to go to court. He is not a part of the $300 arrangement. You know, just 2 minutes more. Just 2 minutes, please. So the detainees complain, members, of hunger. Meals are inadequate. They taste bad. We have witnessed black tea, which is sugar and water, and Cersei. And there is nothing that is nutritional about what detainees get. The health team reported that the food served to cell occupiers is not always maintained at safe temperatures and is stored in an not always stored in an enclosed place, and the garbage receptacle is right there. I want to point you, Chair, to Appendix 1. That is the food piled up to the front. Please note the garbage bin in the corner that is wide open. The food is to the front. Food to be served.
Beside the garbage bin?
Right in the immediate vicinity of the garbage bin. Please look at the other one, Appendix 3. This is this is again food to be served. Both photographs, food to be served. We submit that we just want to make mention before we allow our colleagues in the back to speak, this curious sign that we saw placed out at the Freeport police station. Have members seen it? Appendix 2? And that they can pay for food. This no longer obtains once we brought it to the attention of the Commissioner of Police.
After when this was posted?
We saw it in March. March.
January, February, 3 months.
Yes. And we're not saying that it was there in January. We're not saying that either. We are saying the date that we saw it.
No, I made mention of January to March because at the start, at the start, I remember clearly the Prime Minister announced that the reason why the state of emergency was called then is because time was needed to properly prepare for such an activity. So I would assume that all the preparatory arrangements were in place. So that's why I start from January.
Chairman and members, for completeness, we have to refer to the state of emergency in Catherine North and Kingston Western. We have a dearth of, we have no information on that yet. We have asked the Commissioner to assist us, and we believe that the information will be forthcoming, at which time we are quite prepared to do another set of submissions for this committee. We have made recommendations, which I think, Chairman, I just want to make one more point, not even about the recommendation. I asked this committee to look at Regulation 30 and to get a full understanding of what it says. And it says the authorized person may arrest without warrant. And those of us in the room know that a police officer can arrest without warrant, without there being a state of emergency. That has always been the case. So in this case, however, he may arrest without warrant and detain, pending inquiries, any person whose behavior is of such a nature to give reasonable ground for suspecting that the person has engaged in some criminal or unlawful act. The fact of the matter is that what is happening now is that persons are taken into custody and they are checked against other police records to see if they are wanted. And in that process, the data on them is being gathered. In a democracy, freedom is one of our cherished rights, not given by a constitution, but by virtue of being a human being. And in our democracy, for that to be removed, it must be based on certain legal principles. Chairman, the recommendations are there for the committee's consideration. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, as I had
indicated,
I have to leave. I'm sure Mr. Green will be happy about that.
No, he has asked me to ask you not to.
No.
Let me start, Mr. Chairman, by saying I want to thank the public defender and remind all of us that the public defender is in fact an agent of this parliament, a commission of parliament, and she's out there performing an oversight function on behalf of this parliament. And I am really happy, perhaps for the first time, to have such a comprehensive, detailed, and thorough report on the St. James state of emergency. Even though we have renewed it, I think 3 times already in this parliament without the benefit of a comprehensive report like this. So I want to start by thanking the public defender and also thank her for and her office.
Permit me, remember, I must say that information was sought on numerous occasions on the operations.
And promised. But this is the first time anything like this has been forthcoming. No, sought from the administration.
From the public defender?
To be clear, you never...
No, never sought it before.
Okay.
Just now. Yeah.
So, okay.
But the information on the state of emergency was
okay,
not
but you never took the opportunity to see...
No, I never did that.
The Commission of Parliament, okay.
No. Just the Minister and the Prime Minister. And
PDs for everybody.
Both have failed.
I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, that there are a number of points raised in this report which are very disturbing, very, very disturbing. The fact that only 2% of the thousands of persons detained end up being charged for any serious offense confirms that this is just the same sort of behavior which we saw under the Suppression of Crimes Act and perhaps under previous states of emergency, where this huge net fishing, it's not intelligence driven. We just scrape up a whole heap of young people because the data has confirmed that the average person is only 22 years old, and we have seen 100 and odd children included, 105 at least children included. Now, the conditions of detention have been described as disgraceful, in a word, disgraceful by the public defender. Now, when we take these thousands of young people and dehumanize them for an average of between 4 to as much as over 100 days under these disgraceful conditions, are we putting them back on the road in a way that has left them angry and hostile now to the state itself and certainly to the security forces? And I think we need to look at the long-term implications of what this exercise is pointing to. But let me, apart from that sort of broad observation, just ask the public defender two specific questions. From what I discern from her comments when the state of emergency was declared, it would suggest, and I think we all felt, that given the runaway murder rate in St. James, it was justified and met the standard in the Constitution. Given where we are today, public defender, is it your opinion that the continuing in force of the state of emergency in St. James is consistent with the Constitution?
Member, I think that it would be recalled that certainly when the state of emergency was proclaimed, it was our position that it was certainly a legitimate way and a legitimate use of the state of emergency as a tool to really deal with what was happening in Montego Bay. And I think we made our position known. We felt it was also necessary and legitimate. Where we have reached today, we have already expressed our opinion on the matter from April. We as a Commission of Parliament, we're guided by Parliament. Parliament has extended the state of emergency. The ultimate power, we have come out in April and have made our position known. It rests squarely in the members' hands as to how this Parliament, and by the way, as I remember, Parliament is also bound by the terms of the Charter, right? Which and I know you are. I just use the opportunity to have reminded everybody. What happens?
No, but I understand that it is we have the authority. But as a Commissioner of Parliament, is it beyond your remit to give us advice or your opinion?
I believe I've answered your question. I think I've answered your question, member. It's really in the remit and in the hands of Parliament, the representatives of the people of Jamaica. Chairman, if I may just add one little more line to it. There appears to be support for it in the communities, not the communities that are affected, not the communities from where the young men have been taken up. And the age that most frequently occurs is 22. It is a 22 from 19 to 25 is the real body of young men who are impacted, and it is contained in the report. Parliament needs to do the right thing.
Just a follow-up question to the first one. You were very clear just now to say the authority lies in Parliament and the constitutional provision. But in respect of the conditions that you alluded to in your comments, and I'm really trying to get some free legal advice here now, any of those are in breach of the Charter of Rights itself?
Without a doubt, Chairman, without a doubt. We were going to take $300 on our way up and see what we could find on the road to bring and to share with Parliament. I think from one thing to the other. But I think we all live here and we all know what $300 can buy. Okay. I mean, could it be right, Chairman, Jamaica, for us to take persons in custody and serve them black tea, sugar and water with dry bread for breakfast? I mean, forgive me, I don't know how that is possible. And I think we have moved way beyond that. I think that our democracy requires that we respect the inherent dignity of all persons, but in particular, this group who have been detained and who are going to be processed and released. It's almost like it's a meet and greet event, except that the hardship is on he who is detained, and yet we keep him. The average time is 4.4 days, and we feed him on Cersei tea and dry bread for breakfast. It is not right.
It's a follow-up question. The $300, does that include the cost of labor and equipment, or just for the food stuff itself, which means the person providing the food, the gas, and the
what we understand,
and the utensils, all that kind of
what we understand, member, is that it is for $300 is for food, but we can't go behind that.
Yeah,
because we don't know behind that.
It would be important, though, that we check that, because that is a part of the overall cost. And when you say $300, then it would appear as if $300 per person would include what it costs to pay the providers, the equipment, the gas, and so on. We want to know if that is a part of the overall $300, or is just the cost for the food itself.
It is our understanding that the $300 relate to food. We could make some further inquiries. But you see, member, we have actually seen the food. We have seen the food, you know.
Yeah.
We have seen the $300 food that is oftentimes thrown in the garbage by detainees.
You made mention to the fact of the breakfast. You didn't give an overall view as to what they have for, lunch and dinner.
But, Mr. Chairman, I hadn't asked my second question. but
you have got the answer that you wanted, member.
No.
Anyway, I was on the floor, Mr. Chairman.
No, let me just
this was not a follow-on to my question.
I realize, but since he's on it, let me allow him to complete it. You're true. I understand that Ms. Harris is saying that she don't have that information and would have to get it for you.
Yes, I get that.
Is that satisfactory?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
fine. Member Bond.
Yeah, there was a section of your report that you didn't get a chance to speak to specifically, but having read the report last night, it refers to bullet points, sections 86 and 87, where you talk about the uncertainty as to the operational command. And, you cite a particular example where a truckload of male detainees was transported to St. Andrew. And the whole day they are in the back of this truck. And eventually, because nobody had expected them, they ended up returning to Montego Bay without even disembarking the truck for the entire day. And, they had no facilities to go to the toilet, etc. No food, no water. This suggests to me, Mr. Chairman, well, it is an indictment on the command, quite frankly, of the security forces, because contrary to what we've been understanding of how carefully planned and all the preparations and the logistics, this demonstrates a sort of confusion. And the unfortunate part about it is that the persons who are paying the consequences of this are these same young men who have not been charged with anything and who 98% chance will never be charged with anything under this state of emergency. But they're treated in this cruel and dehumanizing way. And nobody seems to put any weight and value on the long-term consequences of treating our citizens like this and what it will mean when the saturation level of policing is withdrawn. So I'm really sorry that we had to rush the public defender, because I just use this to point that there are a lot of important sections of the report which the 10 or 15 or 20 minutes.
Let me suggest, if you permit me, member. I've said on other committees, and I've said on this, we have a responsibility to the Parliament, and that's why you have committees to do more detailed work and submit to the Parliament for consideration. If it is the view of the committee that we need to invite back either the public defender or any other, we have that privilege to do. It would be an indictment on us if we shot over the process for expediency to complete a report, and I would not want to be a part of that, personally speaking. Right?
I'm quite relieved to hear that, Mr. Chairman, because as I apologized to you earlier, I have to leave for another event, but I think we could spend a couple afternoons with the public defender alone. I wouldn't want to detain the members, the other persons, the reverends from all over, some of the persons who have traveled from St. James, and I wouldn't want them to have to come back again. So I'm almost suggesting, well, I'm not almost, I'm suggesting maybe we need to suspend the public defender. Take the other, since she's based in Kingston, take the other persons, especially the ones from Montego Bay.
You're preempting me, remember.
Okay, thank you, and I apologize.
Sure.
Before you suspend,
Chairman. Yeah, and
okay.
Wait, sir.
Maybe you can just respond.
Member Bunting leaves in relation to the travel on the truck. We cannot talk about that without recognizing that it was the police officers themselves from their pockets took money and bought water for the detainees, of course, to the extent that they were able to. And in our travels and investigations, we have also seen many kind acts on the part of the security forces that we have to mention.
Thank you for that intervention.
Chair, yes, public defender. Sorry, I missed a part of a few minutes of it.
Only need 3.
The regulations that govern the state of emergency gives the Minister of Security the right to detain a person anywhere that the minister decides. It could be at home, could be on a ship, could be in a jail cell, and that is how the detention order, layman's view, is generated. Are you aware if anybody is being detained anywhere else other than in a police station under any of the 2 state of emergencies?
State of police station or correctional facility?
Yes. No, we have no such information. But our information, and it's important for us to note that persons who are detained are indeed being kept at whether a correctional facility or at a lockup. The conditions at Tambourine Farm, as the report shows, those conditions are far better than what exists in St. James. And but it is same $300 a day, but at least they are separated from those persons within the regular criminal justice system. They have bathroom facilities, they have a bed, they have a mattress or a piece of foam, you know. So those conditions are far superior.
Piece of foam or anything in the lockup?
Not even cardboard.
Members.
At Freeport.
Chair, I hope you are not going to try to stop before
I am going to do something, but if you don't preempt me, in light of the discussion about the subsequent engagement with the public defender, you had indicated from some moment ago you want to make an intervention. I want to propose that I take your intervention and we agreed to have a further, right, because I'm mindful of the members from Western Jamaica who have to travel back this evening.
Appreciate it. Sure. A couple of things, and I'll start by thanking the Office of the Public Defender. I think ultimately you work on all our behalves. And for me, a functioning democracy depends on other entities such as yourself, which provide oversight. You know, once the government gives a direction in a particular area, clearly you depend on people to enact that direction, and then you put systems in place for transparency, accountability, and oversight. So in other words, you know, the state of emergency having been so enacted by Parliament, the police and the JDF would go out and then be the feet on the ground in terms of the implementation. And clearly it's very important that we have an entity like the Public Defender to also now provide some oversight to see if the implementation is as we would have wanted it. So I will start from that background, and I think that the role of the Public Defender is important in that regard. You see, one of the things that I think, Public Defender, you have indicated that you saw the legitimacy of putting in place a state of emergency based on what was happening in St. James, first dealing with St. James at the time. I think that's an important point. Additionally, I think it would be fair, and you would agree with me, that some of the problems that you have highlighted in relation to the state of our lockups existed long before a state of emergency. I think it is clear, based on my reading of your report, that they may have been exasperated, it may have been, you know, made more difficult to treat with, clearly because of an influx of numbers that would have come into like a Freeport station. But clearly a Freeport station, some of the problems we have heard about. And I know you, even at that time, you would have intervened, your office would have intervened, you would have made a number of statements around the conditions, some of the things which you are sharing now, which again I think is the right way to provide oversight for the process. Part of one of my first question would be, when was the last time you have visited the area in relation to first dealing with St. James? Right? I was looking through to see if I could date it, but I think I saw a date of a visit around April. I'm not sure if there have been visits since then, but I'm asking because I'm asking to see what I didn't find, what I didn't find from the report and what I was wondering about. I would expect that based on your interventions over the time period, because I know you don't wait until you come to this committee to intervene. For example, in relation to the sign, when you went, you saw the sign, you raised it, and the sign was removed. So I would have expected that over the time with your intervention, there would have been some progress in some of the areas. I don't know if that has happened, and I'll ask. I am very sure that, for example, like the conditions at the station is a much bigger issue, that you won't have progress. But that was one thing. But I wondered when last you went, and that I just wanted that for my own. When last you went, and what have you seen, and how are the numbers now? You've given us a historical perspective, but has there been a reduction in the numbers that are being taken into custody now? Has that eased the burden on the police station? Things of that nature, because I expect that as we go on longer, there may be changes. So for example, there may have been a spike when we just started, and there may have been a change over time. So you could speak to that. One other things I wondered, how many reports have the Office of the Public Defender gotten in relation to complaints regarding the state of emergency? I thought that would have been a part of the report that you submitted. In other words, I thought you would have indicated that we have received 5 reports, 10, 100, with 3,000 people were detained. How many reports have we received, and we being the Office of the Public Defender, and what has the action? Because again, the Public Defender is also set up to work. So at the end of the day, if these reports come in, we see the Public Defender as another arm that can ensure that the rights of the citizens are protected. So I would ask, how many reports have we received, and what has been the action? The other thing, I know much has been made about conditions of the lockups and the $300. I made the point. I think it is an area that the government will have to definitely look at. But it is not a state of emergency issue per se. And I understand the point about how it could have been made more difficult. But it's a much broader issue in relation to how much we provide. And I'm sure, well, and probably I should ask the question, that it would have formed part of your reports to the Parliament before this in relation to the state of the lockups and how much money. In other words, I don't think this would be the first time you're raising it, because the $300 is something that has been around for a while. The other thing, or maybe 2 more things, and then I'll end. I hear you in relation to the detention of youth. One of the things I found quite youth. Yes. Yeah. One of the things I found quite, I say quite frankly, I believe, and it's something that I think we have raised with the JCF before, and from my time at the criminal bar, I do believe that there has been practice where people are taken in for processing, even before the state of emergency. People are taken in for processing. Police go into communities and taking people. One of the things that I found quite telling, though, is that it does appear, when you listed out the communities, that those communities that the persons were drawn from are those communities that have become, their names have become quite synonymous with a lot of the criminal activity that we have heard going on in St. James. So I don't hear you listing some of the communities that we haven't heard about. So I wondered if there is a correlation. So it's not, even though we can say how many people have been charged, it does appear, based on the communities that you identified as the majority communities, that some background work is being done if those communities are associated very closely with the high levels of crime and violence. So I wondered what you thought about that. I think there are a couple more things which I will probably leave for another time. Don't worry, the chair don't listen when I'm talking. You can't proceed.
Mr. Chairman, on the contrary, you know, I try to give him with more latitude than he contemplates. Yes. He's my friend.
Mr. Chairman, I was wondering about that, because with the number of questions that were asked, and based on what you had said prior to allowing him to speak, I think that the member, Mrs. Harrison, will have to spend a long time.
Yes, I think I saw the nod on her face consenting to her return.
Yes, but Chair, before that, you know, I really want to respond to Member Green's comments in relation to 2 particular things. Remember, when you spoke about the state of the lockups had existed prior to the state of emergency, you and I know that that is so, right? So we don't have any difference on that. The point that we make, however, is that a detained person should not be a part of a lockup population. because the lockups is for a particular group of persons. So where the statistics show that they come in, processed, and are released, and that the majority, unquestioned majority, are released, we ought to have considered some space for them, because it's the handful who belong in the lockups. Our position is very clear here now. Those persons were members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, reasonably suspects the commission of a crime and need time to investigate, though we believe in investigate first, lock up after. But where they need time to investigate, we are not making any issue about those matters, you know, member. The issue that we have is the random picking up of the age group according to the statistical data is 20 to 25. We believe that they are not intelligence driven, but it takes me to a point that you made when you say that many of the names of the communities that I called were synonymous with unlawful activities and criminal activities. That may well be so. That may well be so. But not those that you're picking up, is the point that we make. So those communities have been targeted, and it is the youth in the community who are carrying the weight of that. I personally don't, and we don't think that that ought to be a matter of policy or what is normal for a 19 to 25-year-old young man who, by virtue of age, by virtue of station in life, by virtue of where he's located in terms of his residence, he stands an equal opportunity to be detained. So the communities may have a bad reputation, not the youth. That's the point how I would answer. In addition, member, in terms of how often we go, we have stopped counting complaints from Montego Bay. We now have an office in Montego Bay, and weekly visits are made, and sometimes more, to the Freeport police station lockup. The fact of the matter is that potentially, if every detainee wanted the Office of the Public Defender to look and say, was I unlawfully detained? Can I bring a case against government? The potential exposure and liability, I can't count, I couldn't call the figure, the way it is large.
You preempt me to Madam, you want to make up?
No, yeah, but I was still just wondering, Public Defender, clearly, are there any numbers? In other words, I understand the potential numbers, and if everybody were to potentially come, but how many people have come and have asked you to action? I think it's important.
I have actually lost count. Member.
Sorry, Chair,
but I can.
Public Defender.
I can give you a rough figure.
No, hold on. I don't want a rough figure. Because one of the strong points you have made, I find, is a lack of data in relation to when you process the reports from the JCF. I think that's a strong point, especially in relation to the area regarding what was the grounds on which. I think that's a strong point. I don't want the point to be made in relation to the office that you can't give me specific data as to how many complaints, because I would expect that there's an internal process that when somebody lodges a complaint, and this is important from a government perspective, because, you know, people believe it may be, it's not adversarial. If at the end of the day, you get the state of emergency to work better, it is better for all of us. And that is why we're here. So what I don't want is people to be saying that they have made a complaint, it is not being acted upon, because there are different avenues. You have the tribunal, but you also have the public defender. So what I would like, and if you don't have the information, you can let me know, but I would want to have the information to say specifically, since the state of emergency, we have gotten X amount of complaints and X action has been done.
Miss,
sorry.
I'm going to exert certain chairmanship now, in light of the fact that you will be returning, as you have intimated, Madam Public Defender. I will ask you to take note of Member Green's point, and upon your return, we will, among other things, we'll dig deeper into. Let me say, Madam, you are invited to stay with us while we go through the rest. I think it would be instructive for you to hear the presentation from the other groups. Let me thank you for the presentation today to you and your team, and we really appreciate it. I have some questions of my own to which I will defer to another point. The two St. James group, I'm going to start with members of the Ministers Fraternal first. Pardon me, I give certain reverence to that over the other St. James group. So I invite the lead person, who is leading from the Ministers Fraternal. I want to be able to go back to my pastors in Portmore, so I have to be careful of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Reverend Burnett, Chairman of the Ministers Fraternal. Today we have with us, on my right, Reverend Dave Wynne Thomas. He's the immediate past chairman of the St. James Ministers Fraternal and also the pastor of the very historic Birchall Memorial Baptist Circuit of Churches. And on my left is Reverend Glendon Powell. He's a pastor of the Unity Hall as well as the Flanker Open Bible Churches. To my right behind me is Reverend Dion McLaughlin. He is a pastor of the New Testament Church of God in Flanker as well. And then behind me immediately is Reverend Carl Miller. He is from the Nazarene Church in Salt Spring. And so you have our report that we submitted. And so we won't read the first page so much. We just really introduce a little bit of the fraternal, one of the longest running fraternal, I must say, in the country, and they're involved in various things in the community. What we did, we took some time at one of our ministers' fraternal meeting to ask the ministers for their input, because our members came from different parts of St. James. And then we also followed up with some telephone calls and speaking directly. Some of the members shared anecdotal or experiences in their own churches and etc. The impact of this state of emergency, the state of public emergency, was seen by many of our members as a long overdue response to the crisis which had been building for many years in St. James. I'm just going to read, if you should have the report on the second page. A majority still see the state of emergency and zones of special operation as both essential and successful. One member, who is a pastor in Mount Salem for many years, stated that the SOE and ZOZO were very successful and having a positive impact on the community, his members and his ministry. He stated that the community is happy, they can sleep in their houses without fear because of the presence of the police and military. Church attendance and participation positively impacted by both the SOE and the ZOZO. In most areas, the church outreach and engagement into the community were positively impacted because members felt safer and some communities were more accessible to outsiders. One church is doing outreach Sunday schools in the Zozo areas and appreciated the president of the security forces because it enabled the children to come out and access positive teaching, ministry, and mentorship of the church. Others stated that the SOE and Zozo is doing more good than bad. Most members expressed the thinking that it should be extended. They view the operation as receiving a positive reception in the church and community at large because it has reduced crime. One pastor stated that with 2 hands and 1 foot in the air, I welcomed it, but parents must take responsibility for their children. Members expressed the need to come up with more solutions to the problem. In regard to the Zozo, specifically, the impact of those special zones of special operation cannot be fully expressed without stating that members were happy with the infrastructure changes, such as zinc removal, construction of proper fences, concrete walls, etc. Members highlighted the efforts being made to also provide training and job placement. They were also encouraged to hear about the HOPE program and are also hopeful that there will be direct engagement of the churches to provide these programs and to ensure its sustainability regardless of the administration in office. But not all was positive. There were negative impact of the Zozo experienced by some of our member churches. These included the temporary suspension of some of our youth fellowship Friday night evening ministry. They had to suspend some of those meetings. The curfew and the time limitation placed on the church meetings and events. We received complaints that some young men associated with the church and living in the Pit 4, Retirement, Granville, Tucker area were questioned and detained because they did not have, they had no national ID or driver's license, and some used company IDs and institutional IDs that were sometimes questioned. Some churches had to change the schedule of their prayer and leadership meetings, resulting in fewer people attending prayer meetings, fewer meetings of the church council due to time change, and there was also the temporary suspension of open-air meetings due to the restriction on public gatherings. This included 2 planned street meetings and prayer walk. I'm going to go down to the suggestions made on page 3, and then we'll come back to the concern at the very end. The various members made some suggestions. One was to encourage security forces are encouraged to keep changing strategies to achieve sustainable results. There was encouragement for that. Members also suggested that there's a need for better communication about the expected outcome at the end of the state of emergency and the Zozo, and how this end will be sustained. Number 3, encouraging of using more dogs to enhance operations. The use of equipment to view subterranean structures for hidden guns on the ground. Number 5, reaching out for international assistance to ensure a sustainable peace in our community afterwards. Number 6, better promotion of the TIP, the hotline, and this crime stopping program, better promotion of that. Number 7, engage directly with local churches to develop, launch, expand, or sustain programs that reach the unattached youth, address needs in the community, and for long-term progress. And we wanted to underscore our members are long-term committed stakeholders all across the parish. Make room for the direct funding in policies of faith-based programs and initiatives. So we wanted to put on record those suggestions. And then here are some of the concerns, Mr. Chairman. One was the long impact hours on the security force and their families as the emergency state continues. Number 2, in the midst of this great sense of feeling secure, we still see persons being killed. You know, the crime rate is gone down, but we still have people dying. Number 3, how do you measure the success of the SOE and Zozo without more guns being found and retrieved? That was a concern. Number 4 was the treatment of citizens by the security force, especially of those detained for extended period of time, and the communication about them to and with their families. And this was a concern that was raised. You know, the concern also connected to the conditions at the police lockup was something was raised with by some of our members. On one instance, just to elaborate, there was one church where just the interaction of during a funeral service with the police force was very concerning, and we intend to follow that up outside of this house. But we wanted to bring that respecting the house of the Lord in some of those operations is very important to us, to the members of the ministers fraternal. And number 5 concern was the lack of greater emphasis on morals and values development during the state of emergency, and a clear emphasis on that as a part of the operation. And number 6, the need to engage all stakeholders in the parish, including the pastors, to develop and articulate a comprehensive plan for post-state of emergency and the ZOZO operation. So, of course, you have these that we gave to you, and I wanted just to submit that.
Thank you very much, Reverend Burnett. Well,
through you, Mr. Chair, Rev, you are also a part of the PMI.
No, I'm not.
You're not?
But I'm aware of the PMI.
You're aware of it.
Reverend Glendon Powell is.
I don't know. How, at this stage, we heard on the news this morning of killing taking place. How is it affecting the situation as it is on the ground from your standpoint?
Having the SOE in operation, one would feel that some persons feel that there should not be any killing because the soldiers are there, the police are there, all over the place. So persons want to feel a sense of comfort. But then we are having situations where people, the SOE is there, but right now there's an ease in terms of how we are operating because there is no intensity to the operation. Intensity, because persons are going through, and the simple thing now is simple. Wind down your glass, turn on your light, and you can just go through.
No, I don't think it has watered down, member. What has happened is that. No, but they weren't answer my question, and you were saying something.
Member, why you allow yourself to be distracted by your colleagues? You address me or the presenter.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the goodly. He's finished. You weren't paying attention.
No, please, member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. If you would just give me some protection from
That's what I'm trying to do, but you're not allow yourself to be protected.
Mr. Chairman, I want now to ask Reverend Powell, as a member of the PMI for many years now, how is a working relationship between the SOE, ZOSO team members and the PMI grouping / the other agencies?
I think we have a good working relationship. And one of the things that we have not had for a while is that the police is really not at our meetings for a few months now. And that is something that we believe that some of those information that is given there would have been very helpful to the PMI as well.
And also, that information also coming to the St. James Ministers Fraternal would be helpful. Because you see, I believe that it is a situation now where crime is everybody's problem. And it therefore means that all hands must be on deck. You know, we can't point finger on any one entity. We need to collaborate, come together. And that is the only way we are going to really conquer this monster of crime in this nation.
So as a person who has been involved in the community through PMI over a number of years, long before SOE and ZOSO, do you feel at this time, in your opinion, that the state of emergency ZOSO has somewhat relaxed in the sense that it allows persons to carry out devious activities?
I don't think they relax to allow them to carry it out. I wouldn't say that. What we need to be mindful of, one, if you notice there is something that is in the statement that says that over a period of time the security forces will become tired. You know, yes, weary, beat out. So we have to look at ways and how we are going to improve, change strategies, and so forth. Because their presence on ground is vital, is very important. Very important. But we are simply saying if we are going to keep the same people there night and day, they are humans. And over a period of time, they are just going to just stand up and just watch things.
Thank you. If I'm Reverend, I can't see your name.
Powell.
Reverend Powell. Just to comment on your last remark, I had a meeting with the Police Federation this morning, and that was one of the concerns that they expressed. The high level of exhaustion amongst the members and the impact on their families, that it is really a toll being imposed on them. And I've been hearing that from a long time. So I just want to corroborate your own observation. In my own area, I have a section of it in my area, the North, St. Catherine. I have seen, Member Clark might be aware, many times you go through the checkpoints, there are no one there. Not only are they not stopping, there are no one there at those, well, no longer checkpoint if no one is there, points where they usually check. So it has changed tremendously, and no doubt is why you have been seeing what you reported on.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add that there's one thing that the St. James Ministers Fraternal in our discussion wanted to really emphasize, that yes, the security and these operation is important, but we cannot renew a mind or we cannot change a culture with a gun. It's really the work of the church. And we're here, we traveled from St. James here to make this kind of a point that in one of our discussion, one of our members, Reverend Clark, brought up, McCloughan, brought up what happened in South Africa after apartheid, that reconciliation commission. And we wondered if even in looking at some of these ZOSO areas or coming into the community, if some structures could not be included in some of those rollouts that really emphasize value, emphasize caring, emphasize forgiveness, emphasize repentance, emphasize really looking at the ground level in building the character, even while we're tearing down the fences and dealing with those other issues.
Chair, my intervention will be short. Let me thank the members of the Minister Fraternal for coming, journeying to be here with us, and for meeting and considering and submitting to the committee. I think it gives a very different sort of perspective. I like your tagline, in the strength of oneness, together we will conquer. I think it really, I hope the chair heard that one, in the strength of oneness, together we will conquer. You know, what I found, I think there are things that we take for granted, especially if we don't live in communities that are plagued by crime. And that's why I'm so happy that you would have come, because the points that you have made, quite frankly, I never, my mind never went towards it. So, for example, the fact that you've said that church attendance has increased, which would basically just come by the freedom of people being able to move around. And the fact, which I never thought about it, that you are now better able to do outreach activity in the communities, because I guess oftentimes it's not a lack of willingness, but you also have to consider the general safety of your members of your church. I think that is a strong point for me in relation to why something had to be done, and also in relation to how we can move forward. So I like your commentary or your suggestions in relation to, especially number 7, to engage directly with the local church to develop, launch, expand, and sustain programs that reach the unattached youth and address needs in the community. I think now, one of the things, and this is why I said it to the JCF, we mustn't rush the SOE process. And we must be very wary of those who try to rush the SOE process, because we must ensure that we, during this time, take that time with the regained confidence and movement to do work on these things, where the Hard Trust NTA, a ministry like my ministry, can come in with the churches. You are best positioned to plan some of these programs, and we see how we can work together to get them going. And I think one of the things you said is where we go after. I think that is important. But, and to Reverend Paul's point, I think it's very important that we never feel like we are rushing, because we have to get back to a state that we can really operate in.
To add something that I think is very pertinent, and I have been speaking on this matter for years. It's of great concern to me, it's a great concern to the ministers, and because we are always on ground, we don't visit communities, we are always on ground. Very regular, we are there. We hear the different cries, we see what is happening. One of the missing point with the, and it goes against administration in terms of not a JLP thing or a PNP thing. It's just a problem that we are not recognizing. There cannot be. We have a lot of money that we pump into social programs, and I have absolutely no problem with us pumping money to social programs. But it is not going to be sustainable just doing social programs. I always believe that we must twin the social programs with the spiritual programs so as to get the whole. Because transformation, change begins from the heart. Change begins from the heart. And you can always patch up something on the outside, but if you're having a problem on the inside, it is going to, over a time, affect you. So I'm appealing to this august body to remember the church is always there. We are not competing against you guys. We only want to complement you. And I don't believe that there is a more credible group than the church. Sometimes we take small amount of money and do great things within communities. Sometimes it is not recognized. But we are just simply saying some of these we can utilize to make our communities more sustainable. I've watched a lot of things being implemented. I have sat on many committees and I have made recommendations, but they don't want these things sometimes to be rooted through the church.
Okay, well noted. Member Daly and then Member Campbell.
Thank you, Chairman. I too would like to thank the Reverend from the Ministers Fraternal of St. James for coming and to say how much we really appreciate you traveling to appear before this committee. I've listened to the Reverend Burnett's presentation and been reading carefully about the positive and the negative of this state of emergency in St. James and also the state zone of special operations. I think the church, the Reverend would agree with me that the state of emergency can't be forever. You can't have a situation, this is going to be our first Christmas in St. James under state of emergency. I think, is that so? First Christmas? Those January, the first week of January. And I share some of your concerns. I don't see the guns being found. No. Guns in there, crime. And sustained presence of the military and the police in any area. I know some of those areas that you operate in. I know how the church operates. I grew up in the church. You're always there. Aye. And I understand when you are able to have your meetings and all the things you have to do. What happened when there was no state of emergency? You never had conventions, you never had open-air meetings, you never had fasting, you had to leave at 6 at sundown. I just asking, what used to happen in some of these areas you mentioned? Tough areas, and I know how it is to witness in tough areas and police in tough areas. But I would like to know what is going to happen when it goes away.
Thank you, sir. And I'm going to ask Reverend Thomas to help me with that, and then also to encourage Reverend McLaughlin to share his experience in flankers. But I must say that there was a newspaper article about children being traumatized in terms of the crimes. I sat in a meeting with some of our pastors recently. We're planning the National Prayer Vigil, by the way, in Montego Bay, and we're probably throw out an invitation to everyone to come on December the 9th. The National Prayer Vigil is going to be there, and we were talking about the crime and how traumatized people have been. And I was sitting with 4 pastors, and I must tell you that 3 of those 4 pastors themselves were victims of crime. So, there's been an ongoing issue here.
Okay, thank you very much. May I just, before I answer directly, to say that I must commend on a whole the security forces in terms of their own deportment and the way they dealt with us. I've not had one experience passing through any of these checkpoints where there was not the attendant courtesy. I must commend them for that. Maybe there are instances where it might have been otherwise, but not so in my experience. And I think that part of it was very good. Just speaking with one young man who was very anxious, and just to go back to the family thing, he said one thing he regretted, that he was not able to be with his little daughter at the start of the school year, you know. So I'm just kind of emphasizing the need for these human beings to be with their families too. But on a whole, we have found the state of emergency or the enhanced security measures to be very positive. In terms, though, of the holding meetings, I don't think there was any kind of whole-scale suspension of these meetings over time. We're always free in Jamaica to have them. But depending on the area that one lives, in the more volatile communities, there might have been fear and some kind of apprehension to go out. When the enhanced security measures come to an end, we believe that we could still have our meetings, sometimes at greater risk. But some of us believe that the message that we proclaim is of such that we are willing to take that risk. Albeit, though, that we might not have all of the persons going there, because they do, even sometimes when I go, the members will say, Pastor, where are you going? You know, it has become that bad. But if I'm answering the question, we still would have to go on, but maybe at a greater risk. If, when the state of emergency ends, there's not a cessation to the kind of killings that were there before.
Do you have a church in Canterbury?
Yes, not me personally, but our colleagues. Yes,
like
we do.
All of these specific areas that you call, unfortunately, dubbed volatile areas.
Yes.
Don't you have churches?
Yeah, we do. Yes.
And you have convention and mission, outreach missions, and all these things.
We do. Yeah, but remember, what we're saying that it has become sometimes very hazardous. For instance, one evening I was going to church and I saw my choir members retreating. They're going home. Pardon me? Yes, and then just leaving Bible study one evening, and then that young lady has never come back to Bible study. Just about 8:30, her car was stolen, robbed, and so on, just within maybe 10 minutes of leaving church. But as I say, we'll have to go on irrespective of. Pardon me? Yeah, quite so. And
saying the work of the Lord is dangerous.
Yes.
But you have to carry out his will. You have to carry out his work.
Certainly, and we feel a little more strengthened telling you this now. You might draw along. Just feel a little emboldened to do the work. I'm saying it to you. Might just draw alongside us, sir, and give us some extra.
No, my only concern, and we know, and that is why you find the opposition on all occasions. When the extension of the state of emergency is brought to the House, that we support the extension. But the state of emergency cannot be forever. And we have been saying that. And no, I'm just saying, my friend, and we have to now understand that you can't have a military state in a community forever and ever. And you don't need a state of emergency to do outreach, to do zinc fence removal, to have children's Bible school, vacation Bible school. You don't need a state of emergency to deliver birth certificates. These are normal, natural things that any social agency in a ministry can do along with partners on the ground. We welcome it because there's a reduction in crime in the country, and it's driven by Montego Bay, because that was where the crime was the murder rate was being driven. But the crime is all over elsewhere, in Montego Bay, in Hanover, in Clarendon, everywhere else is getting worse. But Mobe is down, and the national number is down, I think, by what, 21%, Chairman? There's 21.1%. And we welcome that. We all, as Jamaicans, were unhappy with the state of affairs in 2017, 1,600 and odd people killed. But I'm saying, if anybody feels, including the church, that you can keep a state of emergency forever, and take away people's rights and just scoop up people and detain them and lock them up and whatever. It cannot be forever. And we have to begin to think about that. The church in Canterbury, the church in Mount Salem, the church over wherever have to understand, flankers have to go do the work of the Lord without the state of emergency or not no state of emergency.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, if I may. I think that the balance report that we try to present by pointing out the feeling of some of our members, some of them right there in Mount Salem who have worked there. In fact, the pastor himself was attacked and hurt and almost killed, and yet he showed up to preach. He showed up to disciple his members. He showed up with his family. In fact, some of us right here know exactly what that means. And so you yourself, sir, and other members here have indicated how much you have grown up in the church and so forth. And so we know that the work of the church continues with or without states of emergency or so. The points that we are simply making here is pointing to the sustainability, pointing to the issues of values, pointing to the need we feel to add a greater emphasis on working with the local churches in those communities to really transform the communities. We want to just encourage that a little bit more. And so, thank you. Reverend McLaughlin, may I, Mr. Chairman, is it possible to allow Reverend McLaughlin to respond?
Sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. The church is always on the ground, as my colleague mentioned, and it is our duty to stay on the ground to ensure that we broker peace among those who are at war. It is a fact that our society has become very hostile towards each other. One of the things we are experiencing is that while the ZOZO and the state of emergency are in effect, there is this level of hostility between the security forces and the civilian. And the church wants to bring to this house that one of the most important impact we can make is to promote that level of forgiveness among each other. We have acknowledged that there are members of the security forces who have been hurt or wounded by the crime and violence over the years. And as a result, they are a part of the peacekeeping initiatives. And sometimes when they're exposed to the level of crime in these areas in Montego Bay, it sometimes creates flashbacks. And how do they deal with the civilian who is attacking them is, it goes without saying. But what we want to do as a church and continue to do is to ensure that we seek to reach these young people with the view of assisting them in changing their mindset as to how they deal with or approach the law. And on the other side, one of the things we're looking at is we would want to get into the police lockups, because as the report showed that the system there is not so much comfortable. And we believe that if we get there to provide counseling, to promote moral values, and to have them rethinking what they will want to do with their own lives, we believe that the church can make this intervention. We are doing a lot of this in our programs in our respective churches. And so we would want to ensure that while the operations are going on, these young people are not just scooped up and removed from the very programs that we have been preparing for them. And so we are saying that with the limited resources the church has this impact that we are still reaching the young people. And we want to say that, yes, I agree that the ZOZO and the state of emergency alone cannot sustain what's going on. And finally, it's like having an open wound. Pressure bandaging can only work for a time. If you do not seek to apply further treatment, gangrene sets in. and you can only go for the removing of that member of the body, amputation. So we are saying that before it gets to that point, help us to cross the boundaries where some people are afraid to cross. And in my community where I passed in Flanker, just Sunday I learned that on one stretch of road, there are two boundaries where persons are afraid to go left or right. We plan to launch an outreach support program there this coming Sunday. And when we were told that one cannot work because some over that side will not come into, then we have to be rethinking our strategic approach. While the police is there, but we are saying the church has that influence. We are a neutral entity that carries the sovereignty of God. And we're saying to this house that when God is presented to young people and shown the right way out, the social programs coming on will bring better enhancement. And so the work is going on. The church is there. But we are saying that without this spiritual impact, without the collaboration between government and church, then, I mean, the struggles will continue. Thank you.
Member Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to inquire of the minister's fraternal as to what is the level of engagement with, because the numbers as presented by the public defender alarms me. And I just want to know what level of engagement you've had, if any, with the persons who were detained. That's my first question.
Sometimes the persons will come and they will complain about the treatment when they are held in custody for extended period of time. I remember an instance where a young man that was once a part of the church I pastored in Flankers, he was taken up off the road. He was locked up, and it was for days that the parent keep going back and forth trying to get some food to him and could not even get the food to him. They complain bitterly about that, and as we have in the report, that you know, parents are very concerned because, as we say, that some of these are really not criminals, and that is one of the problems that we are experiencing, because the security forces should not be assuming or guessing, you know, and just pick up people just like that. It is important for them to act on intelligence. And when they really pick up somebody, they know that these persons are persons who, after the processing, they will be able to be charged. You know, but how they are going about to pick up the people is not really healthy.
And if I may also add, one of our members who pastors the United Church in Retrieve, she sent me this. She said the police went to one of the members of her house, took her son, locked him up for over a month without any charge. His legs were swollen, he was beaten, and they did not allow him to see a doctor. He got help when the aunt called the commissioner from overseas. But this is just one incident. So we've had some interactions like that with some of our pastors.
Right. Well, you may have misunderstood the question I posed, because we were given some numbers by the public defender, and what I wanted to specifically, those 4,000 persons who were detained, I just wanted to know what, of that number, how many of those persons would you say that you had some contact with, and what was the report coming from them?
Yes, across the fraternal, different members have dealt with different ones. The vice chairman of the ministers fraternal is here with me, He had several people that would have been in that group from his community. He's in the Pitfall area. So I can't really give you a specific number because of the way our membership is across the parish is widespread, and the individual ministers are carrying out their ministry. But this is just two specific instances, and I'm sure these other pastors could share their own experiences too. So the ministers are involved with them. We ourselves have not yet gone to the Freeport place. That's one of the discussions we have had as well.
So in making your recommendation, what is the basis of your making those recommendations? Because I see if you've not had personal contact, you're as a collective, I mean, not as individual pastors. On what basis do you make your recommendations? Because I'm concerned that if you say that you need the state's assistance to carry out your social programs, where do you get the data from to assist you in making the kinds of interventions that you want to make?
Thank you for that. It's important to also understand how the Ministers Fraternal functions. It is a group that gathers together, and we listed a little bit of how we are constituted on the first page. We do not ourselves as a fraternal carry out a direct service programs, for example, offering a mentoring program and so forth. What we are trying to do is to facilitate the conversation with the stakeholders that come in for the benefit of the individual pastors and the various programs and social programs within the community. And so we do, for example, go to municipal meetings, or go to several of our members do devotions in schools, and we would go to, for example, the police station to do different meetings. But that's not really the function of the fraternal in terms of, say, meeting directly as an organization in that context. Now, in terms of this report, we had a fraternal, after we received the invitation from this body, we took time during one of our monthly fraternal meetings to go around and ask the various ministers who themselves live in all these communities, including the areas of the zones of special operation. And we asked them for their feedback. Our secretary took notes as they gave us their feedback. We then followed up even with other ministers on the phone and to get some feedback from them. And then we put these things, this recommendation and this submission rather, together. And these included some of the recommendation that came out of these pastors. So the fraternal itself, we don't have an office. We don't operate as a single organization. We're not a church. It's really just a group of pastors and ministers across St. James who desire to work together for the good of the community.
To add to that, that is the very reason why I said that all hands now must come on deck, because the information given today by the public defender, we take that very seriously. And that information, we want a copy of that, and we are going to begin to even work a little closer to them so that we can always have these information being tabulated and we can act based on what is really on the ground.
Other than the two states that we have ZOSO and we have the enhanced security measures, is there anything in terms of policing or social intervention which you would recommend, given your unique position? Yes. Other than, because here we have these two special provisions. Is there any other form of policing or intervention that you would say that we can have to achieve the same level of calm that we have now?
one of the things that we discussed as a group was also the idea of spending more time building confidence of relationship between, our members, people on the ground, our young people, and really building confidence, building ownership, building citizenship. These things will itself rise and give rise to a better community. So that's really was one of the other areas. There's some other things that some of our other members discussed. That's one I wanted to bring up.
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Please.
Yes. Okay. In response, I think in addition, what we could look at is to see how the police self could become more friendly, more integrated in community, like give more attention to like police youth clubs and so on, where the police is seen more as not being combative, but as a friend. I believe if we could step up measures like those, where the young people now, the youth in the communities, will be more able to relate to the police. If you are talking about policing, and I think some time ago in New York, they had this kind of a thing where it really helped to mitigate some of the very serious problems that they were having. I don't know the term, the name that we would give to it, but if the police is seen not just as somebody who come to lock me up, but as somebody we can talk to as a friend, might be able to help somewhat.
If I...
Yes, members, we have a little time constraint. Member Fagan wants to intervene, and I have the lay magistrates from St. James want to hear from. I can't allow you to go back without hearing from you. Yes. So I'm gonna, with your permission, I want to curtail the discussion with the ministers fraternal for now and take the lay magistrate.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just ask one question of the...
You had your hand up front.
The ministers fraternal. I'm a little concerned because it seems to be a little conflicting in your deliberation into respect to going forward. On the suggestions, you mentioned that at number 5, international assistance to ensure sustainable peace in the community. Is it suggesting that you are not satisfied with the stakeholders being part of this grouping in the community? We have the SDC, JSIF, PMI, Police Youth Club, and so on and so on. Have you lost confidence in these people, or is it that you don't feel that they are giving sufficient support to the community? Or what is it that would cause you to believe that you need international assistance to sustain peace in the community?
Mr. Chairman, I think probably the one word is desperation. We want to make sure this thing works. We want to make sure it's sustained. And I think the discussion with the leaders is that any help we can get and all things need to be on the table to have a strong, sustainable peace.
Okay, Madam the Magistrate, Ms. Bryan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Claudette Bryan, and I'm the President of the Lay Magistrates Association, St. James Chapter. My report would have indicated our opinions and views regarding these two operations, which is clearly set out, as you will realize that many of what I wrote are opinions of justices of the peace for the parish of St. James. However, there has been concerns as it relates to the two operations. But first and foremost, ZOSO in Mount Salem has had more positives than negatives. The people there are extremely happy. And despite the fact that we may hear that there are some people who are in the area itself that's not happy, most of them, 85%, of our people there are extremely happy, and not just for the security measures that have been put in place and the results that they have gotten, but also the social intervention programs that have been implemented in that community. Now, as it regards to SOAP, this would have affected everybody in the parish of St. James. It also would have mostly affected the Mount Salem area. I believe that operation has been going very well, despite the fact that it's now scaled down to quite a minimum. The original implementation, we have seen much good out of it. And our justices of the peace who have been actively involved in these operations have had to give their input, share their opinions, and not only that, but make themselves available in these operations in a very, very high, at a very high level. I do know that there have been concerns. If you look in my report, I wouldn't go back over everything that I may have written, but if there are specific questions that you have for me in my report, then I would be able to answer that. But I do know that there are concerns that we have in the parish of St. James as it relates to SOAP. We are concerned that we are not seeing the result of the recovery of the guns. Yes, there are many times people are detained, but we are not hearing of where these guns are. Have they been recovered? Which is no. Yes, there have been few, but we believe the level of crime that we have been encountering for the last couple of years, there's quite a bit out there that needs to be retrieved. The situation at Freeport Police Station, in the beginning, we have had our issues there. And I say we because I personally was involved in that. And I've had to make many trips to the police station to see to some of the matters that were taking place there in terms of people young men being held for long periods of time in situations that's not the best for human experience. But over time, the system has worked its way. You don't have much young men waiting for long periods of time as it was before. But what I found out is that the major problem was that these young men do not have IDs. And for you to be processed, you have to have an ID. So they would linger there for hours and days because there's nowhere to turn. But out of the intervention program, like in the Mount Salem area, a lot of our young people have gotten their IDs, which has made it even much better for them. But there are concerns that we have. As to where we go from here is another matter. What measures are being put in place to curb a lot of the issues that we're having, the gang formations and the problems that we're seeing? What is going to be taken place? What is happening to curb some of these things? Because we know the security measures will not last for long, but where do we go from here? Will the heightened police presence continue? Because I do know because of the heightened police presence, we are seeing less of the crime. The police are visible, they're there, they're making themselves available. So people are now more in a controlled kind of setting where they can't just do anything and get away with it. And will the social interventions program continue and even expand to other communities? But I do know that the work of the justices of the peace in the parish of St. James have been tremendous, and we from time to time we make ourselves available at Freeport Police Station to give assistance. And I know the problem that really existed in this operation was the lack of identification for a lot of our young men. They can't be released because you can't identify them, you can't process them without adequate IDs.
Well, it's not that they can't be released. They are not released for that
They are
purpose.
not released because who are they?
Yeah.
They can't be identified.
Yeah, well, I take care of, no, are you finished? Sorry. Yes. Okay, fine. Let me say thanks to you and fellow Justice of the Peace, and let me also use the opportunity to tell you thanks for the services that you are rendering as lay magistrate in the circumstances and beyond. I pick up one common concern between both the lay magistrate and the ministers fraternal, and it is captured in item 6 of the concern expressed from the ministers fraternal. the need to engage all stakeholders in the parish, including the pastors, to develop and articulate a comprehensive plan for the post-SOE and ZOZO. And you also mentioned about the absence of the exit strategy, what happens after. And coupled with the point that you just made, Madam, is the Minister's Fraternal also mentioned that the absence of a retrieval of the firearms and also what is referred to as the violence producers, the gang leaders, the gang members, the killers, those who have been driving the over 335 murders in St. James for last year. And hence the concern that what you have is really a suspension of the problem, suspension of the murdering and the shooting. And I deliberately say suspension because if the tools and personnel that drive it are not out of the equation, then it's fair to presume that they can come back into play once the environment change. And the presence, the saturation of the security forces, as was raised earlier on, is not a sustainable option. So there must be an arrangement for maintaining the reduction post the saturation of the police. And I mentioned of the report I've gotten from the Police Federation themselves, or the members being able to be there for extended periods of time. So I think that there's a convergence of perspectives by both groups. Secondly, as a St. James, dealing with a strictly St. James issue, the data and the reports submitted by the public defender provides another tool for greater analysis and assessment, and hopefully it can also inform some course of action, at least in the interim. For many of us, we hope that something is in place, because we want the reduction. The whole country wants the reduction, but we want some sustainability when it ends in January. When it, at least for now, that is, well, it's not end. The current period ends in January. We don't know what the plan of the government is beyond that. Many of us have been seeking to find that out too. So you have actually joined many in civil society and others in finding out really where do we go after that. I really want to thank you. I'm like seeming to rush because of the clock, and you have submitted your points as you indicated, yes, are documented. And let me just say for all who have made submission, even though we might not ask any question here, your written submission will form part of the deliberation and decisions that we make within the committee that will inform the recommendations in the report that we will submit to the full House of the Parliament.
Burning question, Mr. Chairman, burning. A burning question, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I commend the Justice of the Peace and those persons who are doing the kind of volunteer work in the community, the hard work. I'm associated with somebody who's close to me who have to be involved like that. But I want to find out in relation to the Justices of the Peace and the ZOZO and those persons who have been detained, and when it comes to realization that some of those persons are detained for petty things and so on, what is the relationship with the state of emergency vis-a-vis ZOZO with the Justice of the Peace in resolving some of those petty crimes and matters?
Well, I do know that the Justices of the Peace in the community, what they try to do is to get involved in terms of matters that they may be aware of, with issues that some of our citizens would have. Even as ZOSO operated in Mount Salem, there are many issues that came up where our Justices of the Peace had to intervene and maybe get into some counseling sessions with some of our people and even help them along the way. There's some, as you mentioned, petty, but as they the justices of the peace interacted with the people on the ground, they were able to have conversations and to help the citizens with some of these issues. Because with ZOSO, a justice of the peace always had to be there when the people were brought in. And that is the thing with ZOSO. When ZOSO was called, the justices of the peace had to make themselves available on the ground where the security forces were. So as soon as the people were brought in, then the justices of the peace were there to help with the process. So when matters were detected, then the justices of the peace would take it from there, if it was things that never had to go to court.
Let me be a little, pardon me if I seem a little bit overbearing, but as you mentioned that last point of the justice of the peace, is there any system of collating any reports that would have been collected by one set of justice of the peace? I don't know if you operate on a shift basis or what the arrangement is. I ask the question just to get a sense if there's any completeness in the reporting of what takes place.
Every justice of the peace would have had a record of the things that they would have done. But then we, as the Lay Magistrates Association, we never got all of that numbers together. It is something that we could do going forward, because they would all the justices who were involved, justices of the peace who were involved in ZOSO, would have had a record of some of the matters and some of the issues that they had to deal with. So they would have had that recorded. So going forward, I could get that information.
And that ties into the point that member Campbell had made, and he asked the question of the...
Right, because they were all put on shifts. Yes. The justices of the peace were put on shifts as they filled the ZOSO operation.
Okay, fine. Once again, thank you very much, members of the Lay Magistrate. The last group, I exercise a little sort of liberty here because they are my parishioners. Yes. So my fellow Portmore MP. No, you stay here. You have been elected to be here. May I invite the St. Catherine Lay Magistrate to...
My name is...
Again, as I said, we have your submission, so if there are any particular highlights you want to bring to our attention.
My name is Florizel Allen, and with me is Mr. Michael Morris. I serve as the president, and he is a past president. We will not attempt to go over areas that were covered by previous presentations, but we'd like to make identify at least 2 or 3 significant differences. One is that in the St. Catherine North, there was only a state of emergency, and there was no ZOSO. Under the legislation, the JPs have a role in relation to ZOSO and not state of emergency. So to the extent that the JPs could intervene in St. Catherine North, it was either on our own initiative or with the cooperation of the police. So as part of the gathering of information to present the submission, we visited the official detention center, which is the Tamarind Farm prison. In fact, when we were there, the public defender was there the same day. So we got a chance to interview prisoners. That difference is significant because under ZOSO, there is a social detainees. Under ZOSO, there is a social intervention element, which is not under the state of emergency. So what in our case, what we are in fact doing is responding to the high level of criminality, which has threatened public order, and there is no planned social intervention. So what we ended up with in terms of the distinctives is that under the state of emergency, there was a clear curtailment of the movement of criminal elements and weapons. but in terms of working with the communities, either to prevent, to detect, to search for weapons, that was sadly lacking. It is. So initially, the most visible element of the state of emergency were the checkpoints. So that curtailed movement of criminals and weapons and so on. But over time, it was clear that the criminal elements were understanding the operation of the SOE better. And so we started seeing house breakings. We started seeing clearly there were some strategic movements to avoid the checkpoints. And so initial diminishing of the statistics in terms of crime, we see some level of resurgence as we got on. Another thing which is significant to us and was mentioned by the public defender is that our detention center, it appears as if the condition there is not as bad as was reported in St. James. We personally got a chance to interview the interview the detainees. To interview the detainees.
Confirms the point I think that the public defender was making.
To interview the detainees. And the biggest issue we found among them is that they appear to have been detained over a very extended period. But when their documents were processed, the date that was put on the document appeared to be different from the date that they were detained. And so in terms of accountability for detention, tracing it to when they came in was not so easy because the documents reflected a date which was not the date on which they were detained. And several persons showed me documents that indicated that. There were some issues. On a whole, the police and the military were quite civil. There was one particular incident where a lecturer who was a JP was handled in a less than civil way, but that has been highlighted in the report. We cannot deny, in fact, we accept with open arms the initial impact that it had in reducing, both by perception and reality, the level of criminality. But I will make one other point before I close, and that is, we believe that the nature of criminality in North St. Catherine is one that should have been studied a little more, and we could have been a little more strategic in terms of how the SOE was implemented. For example, it is well known that in St. Catherine North, there are two major gangs. Now, in order for criminality to thrive, it has to have a nexus with legitimate members of society so that money gained by criminality can only be brought back into acceptable usage if there's a nexus with legitimate members of society that will help to sanitize. So we believe that the state of emergency during this time, there could have been the use of an elite investigative unit to investigate the nexus between criminality, criminals, and other elements of the society. With people like realtors, bankers, how the money is moved to fund the crime. That could have been investigated more thoroughly in this period when there is a lax in the activities of the criminal elements. And if that is not done, and if the weapons are not discovered, then we believe that when we get back when we get to the end of the state of emergency, if it ends in January 2019, we may still have a monster that we need to tame. I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one observation. One of the positives that you listed in the report was item 4. The reports of the recovery of guns and ammunition were reassuring for the average law-abiding citizen. The reports of the recovery of guns and ammunition, you are average of a report of substantial.
No, but there was a particular week in which I think 3 guns were recovered and some ammunition. I think it may have been in the Linstead area. And as part of the Citizens Association, you felt a greater sense of safety when you hear that happening. But then you would have seen the concern that we have later on, that sufficient guns were not recovered. And we know of the proliferation of guns in the communities. So clearly, the criminals have found a way to hide it until they are able to use it again.
Well, I think you made a point, though, about the absence of the operations being intelligence-driven, in order to both identify both the guns, ammunition, and the persons who use the guns and the ammunition.
What was particularly concerning for us was that, as we said, the checkpoints were the greatest manifestation, the clearest manifestation of the SOE. People were murdered. There were at least 2 persons who were killed within maybe 1,000 yards of a checkpoint. That was alarming. There was one incident along the Twickenham Park main road, just below the checkpoint, coming down to Shelter Rock. And another incident was the murder of the pastor on the Old Harbour Road, just up from the checkpoint. Right. So that was particularly concerning. Clearly, they were focused on the checkpoints and did not have a response team that could respond to something like that, or strategic movement of the military or the police within the geographic space.
But that brings me to another question, my final, and I ask it both of St. James. There's a sense, which I share too, that the shock and awe from a state of emergency has evaporated at both areas where, and the concern is that to the extent that a state of emergency is the most extreme tool kit that is available to the government constitutionally. If the evaporation of it, the mental sense of it, having that impact, when people hear that soldiers are out there and police, and then people tremble and refrain from any activities, is perhaps why you're seeing those murders being committed in close proximity to checkpoints where those personnel are. What say you on that?
Well, there are a number of elements in the society, a number of groups, including the Citizens Association, and I believe that we still have enough time. The shock and awe have kind of dissipated.
Oh.
But we still have enough time, I believe, that if we work with community stakeholders, church, lay magistrates, different groups, look at the report of the public defender, we still can do enough to prevent us from going back to where we were before
well, we have
emergency.
To. Members?
Chairman, I would like to just quickly thank the members who have traveled so far to come on your behalf, on all of us' behalf, and to say how we appreciate them, the intervention that you have made, and the sincerity with which you have made it. I have one question I'd like to ask, and if you would give them a minute to reply. This is the first Christmas we're going to be experiencing under a state of emergency, and how would you respond to the small people, small business people, small entrepreneur in your community, various community, have an extended period of time to make a living during the Christmas period. Because one of the downside of the state of emergency is people just have to shut up their little shop and go. While the hotels could go on forever and certain clubs and restaurants could operate for a long time, and the ordinary man, cook shop, ordinary little jerk chicken man had to pack his bag and go, as some would say, early. What is your feeling about an extended time to request of the police for an extension? Don't close down a grand market, all these things. People just go and close down your little functions.
I'm glad for that, sir, because I was about to ask that if something could be put in place. The fact that the police and the soldiers are on the ground, I don't see a difficulty in us extending time. And especially supermarkets, the shops, the little shops, because we have had a meeting with the police, and the people expressed that they are struggling because they are not able to make money, because some person says that 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock, going up to 10 o'clock is when they make their little sale after persons get from work and all of that. The other thing about it is that I really believe that places like pharmacies, critical, because you can be sick at any time and should be able to get medical assistance. Those places, the churches are supposed to be open as long as, because sometimes the people come to the church, get refuge, because we can be there, extended period of time. That's when something might just happen and win some of those over to the kingdom of God.
Any other response to that, Member Dallas?
Yes, I do believe that we could look at some measures. The fact of the matter is, during these seasons of these times, a lot of things take place. A lot. Both negative and positive. But if we have heightened security in place, then we would have to be in place to protect everyone. Because we do know during these Christmas holidays and times of celebration, a lot of bad things happen too. But at the same time, we must be very careful that if we're going to extend the long hours, that enough security in place to protect all persons. I do have a business too, and I would have to close my business. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of some of the things that do happen.
Point, Member.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I just want to bring to light, if others are not aware, that there has been a review of the time, and I remember places of amusement were given up until 12, and they have been moved up to 2 o'clock. Restaurants have moved up to 10, and so are the pharmacies. The pharmacies open until 10, gas stations are up until 10. And truth be told, even though there is a curtail of activities, Montego Bay, and I don't know for St. Catherine North or anywhere else, but I do know that Montego Bay still has a nightlife. The small man that sells his egg sandwich at clock, about 4 of them sell egg sandwiches. No, straight through the night. That's what I'm saying. There's still a nightlife. There's still a nightlife. It's really the standard businesses, the gas station that are closed at 10, between 10 and 11. They are closed. The restaurants are closed at 10, full stop. But the regular man goes back and forth in Montego Bay. There's a nightlife. So and we must understand that, remember, the miscreant of society that is going out there to do the wrong does not wear a badge or a cap to indicate who he is, He looks just like the regular man coming from work or going about his business. And the more that the security forces relax the situation or give up the time, that's when they strike. This morning, is it right at the bus park, that a 52-year-old man was shot by two men in Montego Bay. Another body was found in Lilliput that went missing 3 days ago. You understand? So we can't have our cake and eat it as it is said in Jamaican term. And
members who have appeared before the committee today.
What we have to do, Mr. Chairman, what we really have to do, we have to give, and remember, we are all aware that where the resources, especially human resource, for the state of emergency is concerned, we have already established that it is already strapped, it's stretched, and therefore you have to give them, those who are there, the time and the space to really work. So if we stretch it too far, then they are unable, even in a greater extent, to carry out the work that they really need.
Just in closing, regarding the hours, it is a matter that was raised in a couple of the debates in this House on the extension. And yes, the minister had advised me, particularly in respect of St. Catherine North, that I'd gotten a lot of complaints of a relaxing of those hours. I will check with the commanding officer, lay magistrate, ministers fraternal, as community leaders. I would suggest that you also check with the commanding officers as to the hours that he is permitting, because it is the commanding officers that administer the operating hours in each of the states of emergency. But I'll make my own inquiry to us to verify what is the formally permitted time of closing. And you would have had on the ground what the experiences are from the various business persons and informal vendors.
Mr. Chairman, we would like to know these things beforehand so that we can plan, because things like watch night services, that is steep into our
well, as I will seek to obtain that, and through the secretary to the committee, I'll have that communicated
so that we can
to all the groups. Let me use this opportunity once again to extend our profound appreciation to all you faithful Jamaicans who are involved in the effort to make Jamaica a safer place, but also a just place for everyone, for the services that you have been providing. Much of you have been provided on a voluntary basis. And in these days in Jamaica, volunteerism is not often appreciated. But on behalf of all who have not expressed appreciation, I'm doing it for them. Once again, to tell you thanks and to encourage you to continue to play your part at your local in your local spaces to make life better for most, if not all, Jamaicans. So thank you. Safe journey back to St. James. For those who are going back, my colleague were inferring that you might not be going back, but I won't prod into whatever those decisions are. St. Catherine don't have far to journey to. Madam Public Defender, you and your team, thanks again for coming, and we look forward to having you at another date that we would schedule hereafter. I want to suspect with the end of the month around now, it might, members, try to get it in December. We are going to look at I can do that now. No, because we just started, it will be good to finish it off so that we can move to other yes. Yeah, next week Wednesday at 2 is a vacant slot in the parliamentary time. That is next week Wednesday, the 28th. That is bad for others. What about Oh, well, let's go into early December. No, that's far away. No. Go for the 18th. The next December 18th. What about? No, we are Jamaica, and we are going to keep Jamaica working. It's not rush, it's a matter of completeness. You know that the public is complaining about the work being done by the parliament, and we're not doing enough. We don't want to feed into that psyche. It's 2 meetings there. When parliament resume. There's no sitting next week. It's the other week. Next week, Tuesday is our date. No, we. Huh? When you adjourned last week. We can meet next week, Tuesday. There's no parliament next Tuesday. You were absent yesterday when the House Leader advised. You weren't paying attention then. The House Leader clearly indicated. No, man, that's what we were elected to do. So, members, could we agree, Madam Public Defender, next week Tuesday at 2. Okay. Members, we agree. Next week Tuesday at 2. No, just the public right now. 27th at 2. 2 at 2. Yeah. No, there's another meeting. There's a joint select. Well, I am there. I'm here all day. Anti-gang is in the morning, so I'll be here in the afternoon. So next week Tuesday at 2 for the public defender. No, man. There's one joint select in the morning, which I'm on, and then this one with the public defender is in the afternoon. Yeah, yes. No, that one is the anti-gang. Okay. So we agree. Members will convene next week Tuesday at 2. We'll have the public defender to continue on that one. Once again to everybody, thank you. Safe journey home. Members, pleasure. Members, when we meet at the next week, we want to take the minutes and we want to approve the report. So I'm going to ask you to go through the report which has been tabled so that we can sign off on it when we meet next week. The one on the FLA and MOCA which was tabled. The draft is tabled before us. Members, meeting stand adjourned.